My mother was very musical herself, played instruments, sang songs, and was generally a woman with a lot of talent who, like many women, settled into family, children, things like that. But we had evidence of it when we were growing up. And she was also very artistic. She could draw. She had the talent for drawing. I mean, nowadays you say many people can draw, but that drawing, line drawing, that is definitely that person sitting over there. My mother had that. And John has inherited her musical and artistic ability. So yes, she was a very musical person who by default had a son who had inherited her natural gifts, I would say, innate gifts.
Was it her free-spirited nature? Because there was some tension in her early life with her family, especially because of Alf Lennon.
Yeah.
Was it her free-spirited nature that, and the strictures of the times that got her into trouble with family and how people viewed her?
Well, if you look at what happened then from today's perspective, you would hardly raise an eyebrow. The times have changed. We were in pre- and warring Britain, and a very strict family, in addition, didn't help. My mother was sort of eccentric and a bit fey, a bit, and definitely full of life and the free spirit that you're talking about. But in actual fact, she met Alf Lennon when they were only 13, 14, married him years later, not having had another boyfriend, and didn't have John the year they were married, and didn't have to get married to have John. Had John 3 years later. So what is implied by free spirit, i.e. somebody cruising through their own life without regard for other people, blatantly isn't true at that point. The problem came, they had John, and of course he wasn't there. The problem came when Alf joined the Merchant Navy and was sent away during the war. And this is the time that the Titanic sunk, and it must have been very scary. I mean, I've got to give him something. It must have been very, very frightening to be crossing the Atlantic to the States when almost that same journey, this dreadful catastrophe had happened, and now boats were being shot at, sunk. They were in danger. So he jumped ship in America, and I'll never know why. I know he did it. I never met him. I don't know why. So effectively my mother was abandoned. And in those days, now we have a welfare state in Britain. Fabulous welfare state. Many people from around the world come to join in our welfare state, and it is a brilliant thing, and most people, like myself, would never want it to go. But it didn't exist then. And when Alf jumped ship in America, my mother only knew when she went to the seaman's mission place to get her money, and they said, "You have no money, he's gone AWOL, he's missing, we're looking for him. We're out to arrest him, in fact, because you can't do this thing, can you?" And that was the first she knew. So she was left with John and no money. I mean, it's just unimaginable. Now, if we were in this condition, we could go straight to a benefit office and say, "This has happened to me," and they'd say, "Right, we'll try and sort it out in the meantime." But it just doesn't happen like that at that time. So my mother was living with her father, Pop, and he took them on his pension. When I say took them on, they were already there, but my mother had had money. When he came back years later and my mother wouldn't have anything to do with him, and I can't say I blame her myself, she said, "What did you think?" I think my grandfather said, "What did you think she was doing? How do you think she was living when the money stopped? No communication either." And he said, "Oh, I knew she had you. This is a pensioner." So what was happening to this free spirit. There's not much of a free spirit going around in a situation like that. So I mean, when I talk about it, I feel desperately sad for my mother that this happened in a time when people would be going, oh, look at that woman, and where's her husband? She shouldn't be going out, you know. And the man, meanwhile, had disappeared. Now, he had his own problems. He'd been brought up in an orphanage. My grandmother had been, I'm putting his side, I'm playing devil's advocate now. My grandmother had been very kind with him. He had shared many meals, and way before they got married, because my grandmother felt sorry for him and his brothers. So it wasn't a relationship that was just picked up and dropped. It was a serious relationship where he was very involved with the family for a long time before they got married. And his jumping ship, that situation in a war, must have been bringing back all his own insecurities. And I'm sure he did what he did without thought. Certainly not wishing to harm my mother, and not wishing to harm John, and probably thinking they are all right. They have got pop, but not thinking beyond that. And he disappeared for a couple of years, came back, knock, knock, you know, here I am, aren't you all pleased to see me? And it's well documented how shocked he was that my mother just said, go away, that he'd let her down so badly. They were very alike in personality. My mother absolutely adored John. Well, it was reciprocated, of course. But I'm actually in the process of writing a little synopsis for a book that Cynthia and I are getting together to expand our books, finally and at last. I'm going to go and stay with her and we'll get it done. And I've been digging up quotes of my own, and I found a lovely one from John to say, it's very important for me that people know I actually had a mother. She just had, she'd been through some bad times, that's all. She lived down the road and I saw her all the time. And that is the truth from John. All this about he never saw his mother, and it's just absolute nonsense. It just is not true. So he had that gaiety of spirit that my mother had. Very, obviously, still waters run deep, but very light-hearted, and they quipped with each other all the time. She had this wonderful record called My Son John, and on one documentary that I spoke about it, they actually went and found it. I could see his master's voice and the dog and everything. You know, my son John, to me, you're so wonderful. And she used to play that a lot. They just got on like a house on fire. They were more like friends, I think, because my mother wasn't very authoritarian, but that was with us as well. She was very, for the age, very relaxed. And I think she'd made a decision not to be like her father, not to be like me. I mean, she'd made a decision that she was going to be more light-hearted with us. And we all painted and drew and sang and cut out silly clothes and played games, and she used to make plays up, and we'd do plays with her and things like that. Things that other mothers definitely weren't doing, we knew that. So we all got that benefit, and of course John had it for 17 years, so it's bound to have had a huge impact. My mother played the banjo, which is well documented, isn't it? My grandfather, Pop, had brought back from sea a mother of pearl-backed banjo, which I don't know what happened to, but my mother played it all the time. The back of it was all mother of pearl. I don't know if it was real, but it was certainly the effect of mother of pearl. It was beautiful. And she played that all the time. And you must know by now that John learned to play the banjo. My mother would play the banjo to us and sing, and play the piano and sing, and it was all by ear. And she taught John, certainly the banjo. When Paul got together with John, he was playing banjo chords, and Paul was playing his guitar upside down because he was left-handed. And when you think this was the beginning of the Beatles, everything was wrong. So Yeah, I remember that, and I remember his wanting a guitar and endlessly playing and twanging away. We would all twang away on whatever it was that he had, but oh yes, it was serious stuff. Paul's mother had died when he was 14 of breast cancer, and that my mother would feed him with John when he came down, and when he went she'd go, that poor boy's lost his mother. And that was ironic, wasn't it? Yes, and the fact that she did die gave John and Paul an almost inseparable bond then, that they did really come to rely on each other and grow into each other's pockets, I would say. Yeah, it's certainly, I would think from my point of view, only looking at it later, of course, cement a friendship in a very deep way. I remember him being around. He was around a lot. He liked my mother liked him, my mother cooked for him, felt sorry for him. We always remember him as being pretty. I mean, he wasn't handsome, was he? He was pretty. We knew they were going to be big by then. We didn't know what big really meant. I remember John coming upstairs with Love Me Do. We had the old Dansette record player in the bedroom. That was David, Jackie and I. And he came upstairs and there were all demo discs smooth on one side, and he put it on. I said, what do you think of this? And I said, I think it's awful, and I still do. I defy anyone to say that is music or it's good or the words are good. It's a load of rubbish, isn't it? And they made it with it. It was unbelievable. Did it get to number one? I don't know.
Love Me Do only made it to 17.
Not surprised. But
Please Please Me.
Please Please Me was just, that was a different planet, wasn't it? That was fabulous. And I remember we used to listen to Radio Luxembourg and Radio Caroline. You'd be trying to get through to it, and at 10 o'clock it would all be hissing and spitting. And Jimmy Savile was on. And when Please Please Me came out, we knew, John had told us it's being played on Radio Luxembourg at like 10:15 this night, can't remember, but to listen in because it was getting airplay. And we'd had the demo disc of that. And we listened in, and Jimmy Savile played it, and then he said, well, I sure hope that pleases somebody. And I bet you had to eat those words.